There's a moment most people miss. Someone is speaking confidently, the room is sleepy, everything sounds settled. But one person in that room has already seen the flaw. They know exactly where the logic breaks. They have the correction ready, and they say nothing. Most people assume that person is shy or checked out, or maybe even a little arrogant. They're wrong. That silence has a specific cause, and once you understand it, you'll never read a quiet person the same way again. But here's the part nobody says out loud. That silence isn't always wisdom. Sometimes it's a trap, and the smartest people fall into it too. First, let's be honest about something uncomfortable. When people hear high IQ people go silent, most immediately think, that's me. Ask yourself right now, did you assume you were the quiet observer in this conversation, or did you consider you might be the defensive person, the one making others go silent? That assumption is worth examining, because this pattern works both ways. A genuinely sharp mind doesn't just recognize closed rooms, it also asks, am I sometimes the closed room? That's the question this video is actually built around. So why does silence happen? Research on cognitive load and social interaction shows something consistent. When a person processes information at higher depth, they simultaneously model more consequences of speaking. They don't just think about what to say. They run a fast, mostly unconscious calculation. Will this be heard or deflected? Will correcting this help the situation or just create friction? Is this person curious or are they protecting something? This isn't arrogance. It's cost-benefit processing happening faster than the conversation moves. But here's where it gets complicated. That same processing ability can produce the wrong answer. A deep thinker can misread a room. They can assume defensiveness that isn't there. They can stay silent when speaking would actually have helped. They can convince themselves their silence is wisdom when it's actually conflict avoidance wearing an intelligent face. That distinction matters, and most content on this topic skips it entirely. There are 3 specific patterns that reliably push analytical minds towards silence. The first is the ego defensive room. This person doesn't process correction as information. They process it as a social threat. You offer a different angle, they hear, you think you're better than me. The conversation stops being about the idea. It becomes about restoring their sense of position. Here's what's real about this. Defensiveness is not stupidity. Highly intelligent people can be deeply defensive too. It usually points to something specific, a belief that being wrong is dangerous, often learned early. Understanding that doesn't mean you keep explaining. It means you stop confusing their reaction with a statement about your idea. The second pattern is the surface satisfied room. This isn't hostile, it's just finished too quickly. Someone says, that's just how it is, and the room moves on. But an analytical mind feels the loose thread. Why is it that way? What are we missing? What breaks later if we accept this now? The mismatch isn't intelligence versus stupidity. It's different tolerances for unresolved complexity. Some people need closure to function. Others need accuracy. Neither is wrong by default, but they produce conversations that exhaust each other. The silence here isn't contempt. It's the recognition that pushing for depth in a room that needs closure will help nobody. The third pattern is the dominance room. This one is different from defensiveness. The defensive person wants to feel safe. The dominance-focused person wants to control the outcome. They listen for openings, not understanding. A weak word, a hesitation, something to use. You can identify this pattern quickly. The topic changes the moment the logic gets uncomfortable. They don't follow the argument, they follow the status signal. Once a conversation becomes a competition for position, additional clarity doesn't just fail, it actually makes things worse. More precision gives them more surface to attack. Silence here is not defeat, it's refusing to play a game that was never about truth. Now here's the concept that actually explains the long-term pattern. Every time you take a complex thought and simplify it to survive the room, you pay a cost. Not just time, not just energy. You pay in inaccuracy. You make the idea smaller, softer, safer.
And at some point, the sentence you say out loud no longer matches the thought in your head. Do this enough times and something shifts. You stop editing your words, you start editing your thinking. You pre-shrink ideas before they're even formed because somewhere you learned that full-sized thoughts don't fit most rooms. That's translation fatigue. And it's where silence stops being a decision and starts being a default. The warning sign is this: when you catch yourself saying, "never mind," not because the point wasn't worth making, but because making it accurately felt like too much work. So here's what's actually true, without the flattery. Some silence is discernment, choosing not to spend clarity where it will only produce friction. That's a legitimate, mature decision. But some silence is avoidance, fear of being wrong, habit, exhaustion from past conversations that you're projecting onto this one. And some silence is quiet arrogance, the assumption that others can't handle your thinking, when really you haven't tested that assumption recently. The honest question isn't, why do high IQ people go silent? The honest question is, which kind of silence are you actually practicing? Because pattern recognition is only useful if you apply it to yourself, too. The most analytically honest people aren't the ones who've learned to stay quiet in the wrong rooms. They're the ones who can still tell the difference between the room that's closed and a room they've stopped trying to open. Which pattern makes you go quiet fastest? Drop it below.